All right. Thanks so much for joining us today. Welcome everyone to Queering Education. We are thrilled to have Eleanor Grano and Gracie D'Amore from Jane's Due Process here with us today. And do we want to jump right in?
Sure. My name is Eleanor Grano. I am the Community Outreach and Youth Engagement Coordinator at Jane's Due Process. I work with young people who are interested in being involved in legislation that directly impacts their health. I also do the social media on Instagram, and I've done op-ed workshops, and I work with young people to support them in any way that they want to get involved regarding parental involvement laws. And Gracie is my coworker, and she can introduce herself.
Hey y'all. Hey y'all, I'm Gracie D'Amore. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Program and Operations Coordinator for Jane's Due Process. I wear a lot of hats there, but I think the main thing that I do is train all of our volunteers on the hotline and text line, and train them on the laws and resources surrounding reproductive health care for youth. And yeah, as well as some other things like administrative stuff and everything.
So what we're going to talk to you today about is how to access reproductive health care if you're under 18. One of the ways that Jane's Due Process specifically works on this is that we have a text hotline. And young people can reach out to us via text, via Instagram DMs, Facebook messages, or they can call us on the phone. And we support people step by step to make an appointment for an abortion, birth control, STI testing, and just basically we help you navigate parental involvement laws for abortion and other reproductive health care in Texas. Last year, we served more than 2,000 young people on our hotline. And just a little bit more about Jane's Due Process is the name originated from the name that is on the paperwork for Judicial Bypass. Young people who go through the process are referred to as Jane Doe because to make it anonymous, because their name isn't on any of the paperwork. We do realize at Jane's Due Process that all people can seek abortion care, and the way that, and we know that the way that it is currently written, the laws are currently written, make it very difficult if you identify in other ways. But we will always ask you your pronouns, and we will always respect your identity and sexual orientation. So that is something that we are committed to, and we're trying to improve because we know that this process can be very difficult for young people, and even more difficult if you don't, if you're non-binary or trans. In the last year, we recently developed our leadership program for our clients, and that's just to center young people in legislation that directly impacts adolescent health outcomes. So right now we're working on sex ed with Out Youth and TFN on that work. Our youth leaders have testified in front of Congress, the Supreme Court, at rallies. They've been fact witnesses for parental involvement lawsuits and more. We're committed to centering the young voices, the voices of young people in this legislation. And we do that by me supporting you in writing a resume, supporting you with like how to process your thoughts around writing public testimony or writing an op-ed. That's more of like what my role is at JDP. So just a little bit about Texas teens' reproductive rights. The first one is that teens have the right to free or low-cost birth control at Title X and Medicaid clinics. This includes foster youth who receive Star Health, and you're able to do that without parental consent. The difference between Title X and Medicaid is that Medicaid, if you're, for example, in foster care, your placement will have access to your portal where it would show like the reason for your visits. We know that privacy is a major concern for foster youth, as well as any young person that's on Medicaid. So the reason we first refer people to Title X is because of confidentiality, and because when you go to a Title X clinic, everything is completely confidential. So for example, when you go there, you do not have to give an address. You don't need to show an ID. And that's the way that you're able to keep confidential, because after your visit, they won't even send a bill to your house. They won't send you any mailing. It's 100% private, so that you can feel safe to access care at a Title X clinic without risking your housing situation, or if you're just not ready to tell people that you made an appointment and that you're on birth control, or you got PrEP or PEP, or just got treated for STIs. So that's just privacy for you to decide when you want to share these experiences with someone else. The second thing that young people have the right to is the right to buy condoms or emergency contraception online at a drugstore or pharmacy in Texas. One of the resources we share is Texas Wears Condoms. They will ship free condoms and lube that includes internal condoms too, to anyone in the state of Texas. We also share about how Amazon Prime sells Plan B, the generic brand, for $8 to $10 with free 2-day shipping. We all know that Amazon is problematic, but for young people seeking affordable emergency contraception, it's one of the most available options to them. The other thing that young people have the right to is they have the right to get tested and treated for STIs that are reported to DSHS. What does this mean? This means you can get tested and treated for any STI. The only one it excludes is herpes and HPV. The other thing that can sometimes depend on what clinic you're going to is whether or not you can access PrEP, and that's just dependent on different clinics. The fourth one is that young people have the right to decide what to do if they're pregnant, such as you can choose to continue the pregnancy and carry it to term. You could also choose to place it for adoption, or you can choose to have an abortion. Gracie, do you mind giving those questions that we have?
Oh, they're not questions. It's just giving Texas Wears Condoms and information.
Oh, awesome. Thanks. The other thing is that you have the right to get an abortion without a parent or legal guardian's knowledge through the judicial bypass process. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit more in depth further along in the presentation. When you get the abortion, we do support you getting an attorney, and we also support you with accessing a grant that will cover the complete cost of your abortion. And finally, you have the right to consent to all prenatal care during your pregnancy as a minor. So this means that you can get an ultrasound at an abortion clinic without parental consent, because that's considered part of prenatal care. And then once again, no one can force you to choose adoption, have an abortion, or continue a pregnancy without your consent. The decision of what to do is always 100% yours. And what Judicial Process does is that we support you in making the decision that we support you in whatever decision you decide. So we're going to go over to abortion laws in Texas, and Gracie's going to take it away.
Yeah, and this is a lot of information too. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. You can answer them now, or you can save them until the end. It's up to you. But there are no dumb questions, so definitely ask away. So Texas abortion laws are some of the most restrictive in the state. In the country. Texas being a very conservative state and very anti-choice makes people jump through a lot of barriers and hoops in order to get the medical care that they want to have. So in Texas, abortion is banned at 21 weeks, 6 days from their LMP. LMP stands for last menstrual period. So this can be a little confusing. There are 2 dates for a pregnancy. There is the last menstrual period, and then 2 weeks later is conception. So normally what happens is on like your medical charts, on someone's medical charts, the doctor will say someone is 16 weeks conception, and it means they're 18 weeks from their last menstrual period. It's the same date. It's a little confusing. It's just different ways of talking about it. So in Texas, someone can have an abortion up to 21 weeks, 6 days from their last menstrual period, or 19 weeks, 6 days from conception. Abortion providers are required to distribute materials prepared by the state and conduct state-directed counseling. So this is another law. Providers have to give this booklet called A Woman's Right to Know booklet. It is very biased towards continuing a pregnancy. It uses language that doesn't, refers to the pregnancy as your baby, and maybe not use the language that somebody would choose otherwise to use. There's also medically inaccurate information in there. And then the doctor also has to talk about the state-directed counseling. They talk about risks of having an abortion, like it being linked to cancer, which is not true. They have done numerous studies. They have never proven that. But all of these things are just a way to deter people from having an abortion and to scare them from having it. When in reality, having an abortion is safer than getting your wisdom teeth extracted, like 12 times safer or something like that. There's also a state mandated ultrasound. And the thing that is key is that it needs to be done by the same doctor who's going to be either giving the abortion medication or doing the in-clinic abortion. So maybe somebody has already had an ultrasound with their primary care physician, or maybe they went to a Title X clinic and they were able to get the ultrasound. They still have to do it again with the doctor who will be providing the abortion. And so this makes it seeking abortion services having several appointments. So there's the first appointment where you have the ultrasound, the doctor gives you all of the state mandated information. That appointment usually lasts around 3 to 5 hours, just because there are so many patients to see, and there's usually only one doctor to do all of these things. And then after 24 hours, Elle, if you want to go to the next slide for me. After 24 hours has passed from the ultrasound and the state mandated information, then somebody can actually have their abortion, whether they decide to do the medical abortion, which is the pill, 2 pills actually, that can be taken up to 10 weeks from their last menstrual period, or if they prefer to do the in-clinic or aspiration procedure, which can be done up to 21 weeks, 6 days from the last menstrual period in Texas. But yes, there has to be a 24-hour mandated waiting period. During the ultrasound in that first appointment, abortion providers are required to offer the option of viewing the ultrasound image or listening to the heart tone if there is one available. So they have to describe the pregnancy in detail, the length of the pregnancy, how many weeks they are, and they have to offer viewing it. A patient can always refuse. They don't have to look at it if they don't want to, but the doctor does have to describe it, and they also have to, the doctor will have to listen to the heart tone. That usually happens around 14 weeks or so, and then give the option to the patient if they want to. Now that can be even harder for young people who are under 18 who are needing a judicial bypass, because that's the loophole. You can either get parental consent for an abortion, or you can get a judicial bypass, which means going in front of a judge to get permission to consent to your abortion without parental involvement. What's really frustrating is that the judge will always ask if you looked at the ultrasound and if you have the image with you. So it is still an option, but it's still an option to not look at the ultrasound, but it's definitely encouraged to make a stronger case in front of the judge that, you have looked at all of your options, you understand what pregnancy is, and how many weeks you are, and it can be really frustrating, like somebody shouldn't have to look at their ultrasound if they don't want to. But for young people, that option is really taken away if they want to consent to this on their own. A couple years ago, Texas also banned private insurance from covering abortion. So they already had the law that Medicaid or any federal Insurance will not cover abortion. And then, so some private insurance companies could cover it. Like I know, what was it? I think like Apple employees, their insurance like covers abortion at 100%, which is really amazing. But a couple years ago, Texas banned private insurance from covering it. So even if your insurance does cover it, you still have to pay out of pocket. And the total cost can range from, $600 to $1,300, depending on how many weeks someone is. And that's someone's full rent, or if somebody doesn't have a job, how are you supposed to come up with that? So it's really frustrating that Texas has implemented all of these laws to deter people. Next slide, please. So minors who want an abortion are required by state to, like I said, either notify their parent or legal guardian. The parent or legal guardian has to go with them to the clinic and sign all of the paperwork with them. If that's not an option to talk to their parents, then they can do a judicial bypass. And we're here to help young people throughout the process of a judicial bypass. It can be really intimidating and confusing, preparing someone for court to talk in front of a judge, but that's why we have our case manager and attorneys that will definitely prep people before they go. Minors, there's a couple stipulations with the law. The judicial bypass application has to be submitted in the county of residence, which can be really hard because some counties are way more conservative than others. Like it's easier to get a judicial bypass granted in Austin than it would be, maybe somewhere in Lubbock potentially. There are a couple loopholes with that. So if you live in a county that is less than 10,000 people, then you can go to a different county. Or if an immediate family member works at the courthouse, then you can also go to a different county. And then I think it's you, Al.
Yeah. No, this one's yours.
Oh, sorry. So Texas abortion clinics, there are not that many considering, I don't even know how many people are of reproductive age in Texas, definitely millions. And there are only 22 clinics in Texas that will provide abortions. Jane's Due Process only partners with 17 of them, and that's because these other 5 clinics will not accept judicial bypass cases just because of the extra paperwork and just not wanting to help people with that process for whatever reason. So we partner with 17 of them. And as you can see, they're in the major cities of Texas. So there's a lot of area that is not covered and people have to drive a really long way to get to it. So we have clinics in Fort Worth, Dallas, Austin, Houston, San Antonio, McAllen. El Paso has a Planned Parenthood, but they currently don't have a doctor at the moment. So if somebody lives in El Paso, we always refer them to go to New Mexico and Albuquerque. New Mexico doesn't have any parental involvement laws. So, and there's also no mandatory waiting period. So it's not as strict. And that's always an option if somebody can drive to New Mexico. It's definitely an easier process. Now there's like kind of a loophole with a 24-hour mandated waiting period in Texas. If somebody lives over 100 miles from the nearest clinic, so that's like somebody living up in the Panhandle, or Lubbock or something like that, the nearest abortion clinic is going to be over 100 miles. So how that process works is they would call the clinic, they have to speak to the doctor on the phone, and that's when they get the state mandated information, and then they're told to look at the women's right to know booklet online. And then when they come into their appointment, it has to be at least 24 hours from the time they get the information until they can come in. They do an ultrasound in the morning, and then there's a 2-hour waiting period before they can actually have the abortion. So there is that loophole, and that unfortunately is like a really common case for people to do because there are so many Texans that live in the middle of Texas that have to drive several hundred miles to get to the nearest clinic. Yeah.
So how's everyone feeling? It's a lot of information, we know, but we are here to answer any questions that you might have as it comes through. We know it can be overwhelming to get all this information at once, but the thing is like we have a text hotline. If you forget anything, if you don't remember anything, just text us. We are always one text away from answering your questions in regards to sexual and reproductive health care that you may need to access without consent from a parent or legal guardian. With that said, we'll talk a little bit more about judicial bypass. We've talked about it a little bit at the beginning. Gracie mentioned it a little bit more. So we're just gonna talk a little bit more in depth now. So the judicial bypass for an abortion is an order from a judge. So instead of asking your parents or a legal guardian, or for people who are in foster care, their case manager, instead of asking them who would petition the judge, you go through this process called judicial bypass, where you ask the judge for permission. And if you're in foster care, this is a different judge than you would interact with over like your family court case. And this is not unusual. 37 states require parental involvement or permission from the court for an abortion, including Texas. The process, though, is completely confidential. All documents refer to you as Jane Doe. We know how difficult that might be if you do not want to present as a girl or do not want the name Jane. But we are here to help you. The other thing to know is that U.S. citizenship is not required to apply. So we also support young people who are coming over from another country, and they may be an unaccompanied minor and may be placed in a detention center with the Office of Refugee and Resettlement. We can help them as well to get an abortion. But it's really important to know that regardless of your citizenship status, you can always call us for support, and the support that we will provide you with will always be free, regardless. We help everyone, and we are here to provide emotional support throughout the entire process as well. So how do you apply for it? The first step is to call our hotline and to complete an intake form. This is where we ask you questions like, how are you feeling? Gracie's so good at it, because I think sometimes when we're in crisis mode, no one ever asks how you're feeling. So we ask, how are you feeling? What's your name? And we only ask for the first name because the process is anonymous. We don't need your last name. We ask for your preferred pronouns. We ask for a safe phone number to contact you, whether it's okay to text or leave voicemails. If that's not an option for you, we can also use WhatsApp or Signal or Instagram or whatever form of communication feels most safe for you if using a phone is not the best way. We have the rest of the intake questions on our blog, but it's just basic questions to better understand your situation. The next step after that would be to schedule an ultrasound. As you know, you do not need parental consent to get an ultrasound in the state of Texas because that's considered prenatal care. And we will also pay for the ultrasound as well. So that's another thing that you don't have to worry about. You do want to call us so that way we can make sure to let the clinic know that we're covering the cost of your ultrasound. But as always, just call us, we're here. After you get your ultrasound, your case manager will assign you to an attorney free of charge. Your attorney will help you prepare for all the questions that you might be asked by the judge. And then they will file your bypass application. After that, you'll get a private hearing with the judge. It's a little bit different than you might see in The Good Wife or any legal drama. You're not in a courtroom, you're in the judge's personal chambers, and it's meant to be private, and you won't be in a public space. So what kind of questions does the judge ask you? I'm just going to play here for sound so that you can hear what the judge's voice will sound like. Just the moment.
I'm Susan Fox Gillis. I'm a recently retired judge from the Circuit Court of Cook County. If I were handling a case, or when I did handle a case, when the young woman and her attorney came into my chambers, I would greet them, say hello. I would call her Miss Doe. Sometimes they would start to tell me their names, and I would interrupt and say, no, I don't need to know your name. In this case, you're Jane Doe. This is how this is going to proceed. You're going to be sworn in. This lady over here is the court reporter. She's taking everything down. Your attorney is going to ask you the questions.
When you had sex, why you had sex, who knew you had sex, how you got pregnant, weren't you using contraception? All these really invasive details about your life. Lori
So that's from a podcast called Choiceless. It's by Rewire, and it talks about just the barriers that young people face when seeking sexual and reproductive health, the kinds of questions that are asked. Now, I just want to say for reference that this is a friendly judge. This is the judge that will grant your judicial bypass case. But that voice still sounds intimidating, especially, I think, for Black and brown youth who go through, who already feel criminalized by the judicial system. It can be really traumatizing because it feels like you're getting in trouble. I think if you have like other interactions with the court that were negative experiences, I feel like almost all court hearings are negative experiences. It can be really re-triggering. And you're required to answer all these questions, and they are almost like a pop quiz where there's no multiple choice answers. You have to give a response, an oral response. So even if a young person answers all these questions right, there's still this slight possibility that the judge may deny the case, and there's no reason why that they are denied. Because you should always have the right to an abortion. But that's why we're here. We're here to continue to support you because we know how unjust this process is. Regardless if we're helping you or not, like it's not a process that any young person should be made to go through. With that said, the process usually takes 1 to 3 weeks. For Texans in rural areas, it could be longer because, as Gracie mentioned, if you don't live in an area with an abortion clinic, it's pretty far. So it can be 1 to 3 weeks, and so there's just other factors like if you have a car, do you have access to transportation, can you take off school? So just depending on that, it can be fast, it can be slow, but we're here to support you every step of the way. The other thing to know is that young people do have the right to an interpreter if you do not speak English, and our case manager, Irma, ensures that you're able to access an interpreter. Irma's really great at this part because we'll even sometimes have situations where minors will need an Indigenous speaker, and we work hard to make sure that everyone has an interpreter who can help them advocate for their right to an abortion in their preferred language. Also, when you call our hotline, if you speak another language or if your friend or someone you know speaks another language, they can ask the volunteer for that language, that preferred language, and we can make sure that you have access to that at no additional cost. With that said, what happens if your bypass is denied? If the bypass is denied, you have the right to file an appeal or travel to a state that does not have a parental involvement law for abortion. For young people in Texas, that nearest state is New Mexico, and it takes anywhere between 5 to 14 days to file an appeal and hear the outcome of that case. So as we were saying, it takes 1 to 3 weeks. If you think about 5 to 14 days, that's an additional 1 to 2 weeks added on top of that. So young people sometimes will have their abortion delayed by 2 months. It is an unjust process. And then with Gracie, we'll take it over with how we support you on the text hotline.
Yeah, thanks. So we all, I mean, like Elle just said, this is an incredibly unjust process. It's all, I mean, abortion access in Texas is already unjust. And then for young people trying to seek care that, you know, they feel is the best decision for them, and they definitely have that right, it's 10 times harder. And so we do everything we can to support you, starting from, you know, either a text message or a hotline when someone starts seeking information. I train our volunteers, and we train them on all of these processes. And one of the biggest things I train people on is, you know, don't ever assume anything of someone, meet them where they're at. I want people who text in to feel validated. I want people to feel educated afterwards so they can make the best informed decision for themselves. So all of our hotlines, we have the 24/7 hotline that you can call. That is the place where you have to do an intake if someone's wanting the judicial bypass. And then we have our text line, which operates every day from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. They're all run by volunteers. We train them on the reproductive rights of minors, including non-coercive options counseling. And that's essentially, you know, how I talk to the volunteers about it is when somebody finds out they're pregnant, that can be really overwhelming. And you kind of go into, you know, you can kind of go into like crisis mode. Like, what do I do? This is friggin' terrifying. And so if somebody comes in and they're like, I'm pregnant, I don't know what to do. I don't want our volunteers to assume that they want to have an abortion or they want to continue the pregnancy. I want our volunteers to ask open-ended questions to see what you need, meeting you where you're at, how you're feeling, so we can direct the conversation in a way that feels good for you. And then like Elle was saying, we have interpretation services. We have dedicated text line volunteers for Spanish speakers who can speak to, you know, those who text in who speak Spanish. And then if it's a different language that somebody needs, we always encourage them to call. It's just a lot easier using an interpreter over the phone instead of trying to use Google Translate or something like that. And we want to make sure that all of the information is given accurately as much as possible.
Gracie, we have a question. What if someone changes their mind?
Totally fine. That's one of the things I also encourage volunteers to do is like, just because you've started this process for a judicial bypass and abortion does not mean that you have to continue with that. And that happens sometimes. You know, people decide that they would rather continue the pregnancy and either parent and have an adoption, and that is 100% okay. There is no judgment. However somebody wants to, you know, whatever action somebody wants to take in their own life has no effect on me or on our volunteers. We want people to feel supported as possible in whatever option they choose. And, you know, that happens. Like somebody's like, I'm going to continue. So then we give them the right resources for, you know, getting on Medicaid if they want insurance, and, you know, connecting them to the right resources to take parenting classes if that's what they want to do. We want to make sure that whatever option you decide, you have the most education involved. That's a really good question. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes. Yeah, so the text line started in June of 2017, and it started because on our intake for judicial bypass, one of the questions is, and this is not meant to sound judgmental, it's more of like a statistical thing that we wanted to know is, you know, were you on birth control at the time? And then what were your reasons for not being on birth control? And the number one reason was they didn't know that they could get birth control without their parents' consent. And so it was kind of like an aha moment. Our staff member at the time, Amanda, decided to launch this text hotline, which would connect teens to Title X clinics so they can get free and confidential birth control without having their parents' consent, and kind of taking more like a preventative measure. So in that first year, we took over 200 text messages. In 2019, we were averaging around 150 to 300 text messages. And I think that number is probably higher in these last few months with COVID happening. We had some like amazing people talk about us on TikTok, so we got a lot of really good new text from that. So I think it's probably closer to 300 and 350 now.
We have another question. We have a question asking if we cover practical support or for young people who are passing immigration checkpoints on top of the bypass.
Yeah, super good question. So we do help with practical support. We help with transportation, either from our volunteers or like helping with other networks, or even getting a lift for somebody if they need it. That's what our case manager, Irma, is there for, to kind of, not only to connect them to the attorney and answer any questions that they might have about the process, but like any other barriers that come up. We want to make sure that they have that support. With the immigration checkpoints, we definitely try to, that's another thing that Irma will work around with. Elle, do you have any specific, I don't know of this coming up when people have to drive, but do you know of anything specific?
Yeah, I know that Irma has worked with IECs, which helps people navigate the checkpoints or discuss like alternative routes if it involves a checkpoint in particular. Sometimes it can be easier just to fly if you have like a different form of identification of a passport. But she definitely works with that and works with immigration groups to make sure that everyone is able to access the care that they need.
Definitely. Thanks. Yeah, and then I would say most of the text messages that we get are about birth control, asking, from young people asking for themselves about how to access birth control and where to get a Title X clinic. We also get questions about emergency contraception, pregnancy tests, pregnancy scares. I always refer people to scarletine.com. It's a really awesome resource. I don't know if anyone has heard of it before, but they have so many articles about like pregnancy scares, like what is high risk and low risk for getting pregnant. And they talk about like healthy relationships and things like that. It's just a really informative site for anybody. We talk about, we get text messages about abortion, consent and sex education, period tracking, wanting to do like natural cycle tracking for birth control. We definitely have resources for that. And then occasionally we get text messages from adults who are wanting information about abortion services, so we connect them. We also do get text messages from teens out of state who are wanting to get a judicial bypass. There are 37 states in the country that have parental involvement laws, where they either need to get parental consent or they have to get a judicial bypass. So we don't want to leave anybody hanging. That's kind of a pilot project that we're doing where I'm offering case management to folks out of state, and that's just like connecting people to the right resources, the right organizations, making sure they're getting funding and all of that. Yeah, so 72% of our texts are usually about our teens asking about parental involvement laws for contraception and abortion. The top cities are Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Fort Worth, and this was as of 2019. We definitely get, texts from all over Texas and outside of Texas. Next slide, yeah. So kind of how our text line works. I'm not super techy and I always like really mess up talking about this, but bear with me. So it's, we port our number, we get our phone number. It's kind of like where the text messages come from Twilio. And then we answer all of the text messages through Slack. And there's an app that allows Twilio and Slack to talk to one another, which is called Sunshine Communications. It used to be Smooch. And what that does is it makes the username anonymous and confidential. So nobody can see, none of the volunteers can see the phone number when somebody texts in. It generates like this username that is an adjective and a animal. So every time I text in from my personal phone, I'm Mary Whale, which is kind of cool. But somebody will text into that our 866-999-5263 number. It's also the same number as our hotline, so same number all around. And then this is number 2 is what it looks like on our Slack channel. The new texts come in, and then when a volunteer sends it, it'll just say that it's coming from that 866 number. Next slide, please. So what do our interactions look like? I think the text line is really great because it gives so much information, especially when somebody is wanting to go through the judicial bypass process. I think it can be really intimidating for anybody to call, you know, there's this number and you're going to talk to a stranger and you're going to talk about something that's like really intimate and personal. So I think the text line comes in handy because it's like a little way to gauge, like, are you legit? Is this real? What, like, you're kind of testing the, you know, the support of the other person that you're texting with. So this can just be a way to get like really good information, understanding next steps, and making somebody feel a little bit more comfortable in calling. So like with this interaction, you know, one of the youth had asked, like, is it hard to convince the lawyer? Because I think that's a really common and good question to ask. Like, do I have to convince the lawyer that this is why I want an abortion? Which, no, you don't. You never have to prove to anybody at Jane's due process why this is the best decision for you. That comes later with the judge, which is, you know, we've talked about, incredibly frustrating. But the volunteer was so great and was like, no, you don't have to convince anybody. The lawyer's on your side. And then after talking about this conversation more and the whole process for 15 minutes, they were like, okay, cool, I think I'm ready to start the intake process now. And then they called the same number that they were texting. It takes 15 minutes usually to complete the intake with the volunteer, sometimes quicker than that. It just kind of depends on how many questions somebody has. And I think it's just like a good way to build rapport and to understand that we're on your side. We are, you know, sex positive, non-judgmental. We want this to be a safe space where people can get the right information and make the best decision for themselves. Oh, and one really quick thing. So I wanted to talk about when it comes to Title X clinics. It's really easy if you want to find out where your nearest Title X clinic is. You can just text into the hotline. We'll ask for your zip code, and then we can look up the nearest clinic to your zip code. We will coach you on how to schedule an appointment, because a lot of clinics will say, if you say, hey, are you a Title X clinic? There's such a high turnover rate with staff that they'll say, no, we're not, when actually they are. So we coach people to say, I need to make an appointment for birth control. I don't have any money. I can't tell my parents. I need a confidential appointment. And that will like automatically trigger this specific intake. So it can be a free appointment, and they know that you don't have to give your address and that you don't need consent from your parents. We can also share information about different kinds of birth control. Bedsider.org is a super amazing resource. It talks about testimonials, tutorials, pros and cons, side effects for like all kinds of birth control, from like the pull-out method to IUDs. And then we can always talk about transportation. We can't specifically help people with transportation trying to get to their nearest Title X clinic, but we can definitely come up with solutions, like looking at bus routes, or maybe thinking about, you know, maybe the nearest Title X clinic is like 50 miles away in Dallas. But maybe you have a relative that lives in Dallas and you're like, oh, okay, cool, I can visit them, and then I'll just sneak away for a few hours and go to the appointment. So we just want to help people think outside of the box a little bit. And we always encourage people to text us back. Like, we're here for you. We want to educate people as much as possible and empower you to make the best decisions for yourself. All right, back to you, Elle.
Yeah, so what can you do? So you can share our hotline. We know we went over a lot of information today. I know that I don't always retain information when I first hear it. So that's why we're here with our text hotline. You can text us any question you have, and we will respond between the hours of 8 a.m. and 11 p.m. If you text outside that number, outside that time, you'll get an automated response that our text hotline is offline between 11 p.m. and 8 a.m. in the morning. But, you know, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 11, we are here to answer your questions. As always, encourage conversations about teens' reproductive rights with the people around you. I know that we're talking a lot about sex ed right now. It's in the news. And a lot of people don't know about their rights and what they can and cannot consent to without involving a parent or legal guardian. especially if you have friends who are in the foster care system. Privacy gets even more difficult for foster youth. So it's really important to like say like, hey, if you're concerned about your placement finding out and you losing housing, it can be helpful to look into a Title X clinic because your placement won't be able to see the information on your web portal, and it won't jeopardize your housing situation, and it'll be free, and it will be 100% confidential. So those are things like you can help the people around you know. Other things is like know local resources that are sex positive and provide shame-free support to young people. Out Youth, our amazing partner, is another one of those awesome resources. And then just know what our hotline will be like, and you can share with them what that conversation will be like. We will never force anyone to make a decision that they do not feel comfortable with. We are youth-centered, so you're the person, you're the captain of the ship, and we're just here to help you steer in whatever direction you want to go. So once again, just a quick recap, how teens can get free birth control. If you go to the OPA clinic, type in your zip code, it'll show you the closest clinic to you. And then once again, you'll just tell the scheduler, I want an appointment for birth control. I don't have any money. I can't involve my parents. You can also text us and we'll help you through it that way too. The other thing to know is that how teens can get free condoms and lube. This includes dental dams as well. You go to Texas Wears Condoms, you search the type of condoms and lube you want, and you select checkout. They restock at the beginning of the month. If you get to the middle of the month, they're usually out of stock. But if you follow them on Instagram, they will tell you when they're restocked. They'll also tell you when they're shipping. They'll also show you what the packages look like if you're concerned about privacy and what that's going to look like. The other thing about Title X clinics is that with gender affirming care, I think it varies from clinic to clinic. We can look, I think after the presentation, we can go to the website to see what it looks like. It may look different based on clinic to clinic, just as it looks different on what clinics offer PrEP. The way it works is that they get these federal dollars from the US government, and they get to choose how they spend it. So they get a budget, and like some clinics decide to invest in PrEP and PEP. Some clinics don't. And it varies from clinic to clinic. So that's like another question that you can ask when you talk to the scheduler when you're making your appointment. You can say like, hey, do you cover gender affirming care? Do you have PrEP and PEP in stock? What is the process for a person under 18 to get it? And you can always just ask those questions. And you can also ask them as hypotheticals if you're concerned about your privacy. So it's just like, what if my friend, I have a friend who's interested in knowing about gender affirming care. Can you tell me if they can get support here? And that way you can still shield yourself if you're concerned about someone attacking you, or if you just don't have emotional capacity that day to deal with a hurtful comment. You can just say like, I have a friend. So that way you can try a different approach. As always, like if someone is ever mean to you at a clinic, please text us. There's nothing we love to do more than to go Hulk when someone treats a young person with disrespect. So please, like, no matter your experiences, always feel safe to reach out to us about an experience at a clinic. We are here to support you and to make sure that you're able to advocate for yourself. And we're here to be the Karens who are going to tell them, I want to speak to the manager, because that's what we do. The other thing to know about is how teens can get emergency contraception. So we all know about Plan B, that's the name brand. What's the knockoffs? Knockoffs are the other name for generic brand. They're just as great. There's brands called My Way and My Choice. We also made a TikTok about all the different generic brands that range from $8 to $20. And they can also ship it to an Amazon locker. So if you're concerned about it going to your home, if you ship it to an Amazon locker, you can pick it up at your local 7-Eleven. It looks like you're just getting a Pepsi and some Plan B, and no one knows. During COVID, I think it's really important to talk about how if money isn't a concern, you can go through a drive-through pharmacy. You can also get a pregnancy test through the drive-through pharmacy as well. There are some weight limits for Plan B, but those ones, the prescription brand of Plan B, which is the stronger one if you're above 150 pounds, there's Ella, and you can get it also free at a Title X clinic. You can ask them to stock you up with like 3 or 4 just in case an emergency happens. So when you go to a Title X clinic for STI testing or Plan B or birth control, just ask like for 3 or 4 extras, and they may be able to give it to you. So just so you're always prepared for an emergency situation. The other thing to know is like, what if you don't have time to wait for 2-day shipping? What if you need it now? Abortion clinics are another great spot for affordable affordable Plan B that minors can get. And it's like about $20 to $25 at your local abortion clinic. I think we have a question about Plan B interfering with hormone replacement therapy. I don't know the answer to that question, but I can look into it and I can get back to you all. And just once again, follow us on Instagram. We are here to answer your questions and to support you in any way possible. Do you have any questions? I'm just going to show you how the OPA clinic looks like. And so we can put in an Austin, let's just use Houston. So this is what the OPA website looks like, and this is what the information we give you from our text hotline. It's updated every week, but there's certain areas that are a little bit more that haven't been updated in a while. But we usually know at JDP as things change. So once you click on a clinic, you can, on OPA, it'll tell you what services they offer. So for this clinic in particular in Houston, it shows you all the different types of birth control they have. It tells you all the different STI testing and treatments that they offer. They also talk about like other things they offer, like depression screening, BMI, intimate partner violence, diabetes screening. They talk about pregnancy services that they offer. So this is like support with someone who's experiencing infertility. They also do pregnancy testing and counseling. And they also offer HIV testing and PrEP for HIV prevention. So it doesn't look like they offer hormone replacement therapy, but some clinics are great resources for PrEP and PEP if you are wanting access to that without parental consent. It also tells you the hours that they're open, which it can be really helpful in planning around your day. Is there any other questions that you all have?
Awesome. Thank you so much. That I knew a lot of this going in, but I still learn things from y'all. And yeah, and as y'all know, but maybe our viewers don't, I used to work at an abortion provider. And so I learned things from y'all. We definitely encourage y'all throw your questions in the chat. And if we can't answer them now, we will try to include those answers when we post the video of this session on the Queering Education website. So yeah, feel free to drop questions in the chat. We also have another queering education session tomorrow on finding queer-friendly employment. That should be really good. And then next week, one of OutYouth's staff members, Colton Dowling, who is a professional comedian, is going to be doing a session on like using comedy to cope. It's called OMG, That's So Gay. And we hope that you will join us for that because it should be a lot of fun. But yeah, I'm not seeing any questions coming up in the chat, but I do want to give folks just another minute or two. Gracie, Eleanor, was there anything else y'all wanted to add?
No, I'm really excited to be here and talk about it. I guess for a little bit of background on myself, I actually used to work with Eleanor and Heather at the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and then I also used to work at the same clinic that Heather worked at too. So yeah, there's a lot of information. It's super overwhelming. But yeah, we're here to give you any information that you want. Even if you like don't need the service now, but you were like, you know what, I have this question. Can I do this? Text us. We're super happy to answer and talk with you.
Yeah, we're always ready with an emoji and a link for a resource. I think that's something that we learned when we were at Love is Respect, is like links are our love language, and we will make sure that you get the right information that you're looking for and connect you to services that will be affirming and supportive. And if not, we will ask to speak to the manager on your behalf.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are lots and lots of folks over 18 who are on your side and who are here to help make sure that you get what you need. So don't be afraid to reach out. It looks like E is dropping links in the chat, so definitely check those out. We appreciate your feedback, yeah, we hope to see you at the next queering education sessions. And let's see.
Oh, there's AIDS Austin also will mail free condoms to anyone in the 5 surrounding counties of Central Texas.
Mm-hmm.
They're another option if Texas wears condoms, or isn't that the CDN store? I think that is the link to HIV.
Yeah, CDN store is the AIDS Services of Austin's condom distribution service.
I was like, that looks like a familiar link. I've seen it before. It is.
That's super helpful.
It's only for Central Texas. I sometimes forget about that one.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much. We really appreciate your wisdom and dropping all this knowledge on us. And we did have a request for the slides. So we'll get those up on the website as well. The recording hopefully will be up in a week or two with auto-generated captions at first, and then eventually I will get in to polish them up and make sure that they say queer instead of clear. Thanks, YouTube. Yeah, we really appreciate y'all joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.